to Showbiz Chicago, the podcast. Well, it's been my fault, ladies and gentlemen, because I announced he was coming on the show for a while, but I have Kyle Froman with me. He is one of the preeminent photographers of Broadway today. And it all started when he saw Little Orphan Annie belt out tomorrow at a theater, I believe, in Texas. But first, welcome to the podcast, Kyle. Sorry for the long intro.
No, not at all. Thank you for having me, Michael.
Well, so let's start at the very beginning, Kyle, when you shot out of the womb with your twin, Kurt, and tell us about going to your first experience at the theater, and I believe it was Annie, and how that changed your life.
Right. Well, first of all, I sort of, my family kind of straddles like two very opposite worlds. My father was an engineer, so he's very practical, and my mom was a dancer, and that's how they met. When they were teenagers, my dad ended up singing in the St. Louis Municipal Opera, just on a fluke, really. And so, yeah, they met, I don't know, in the mid-'50s, I guess. So there was this artistic gene that sort of trailed on through our family. My sister ended up dancing and opening a studio in Fort Worth, Texas. So we kind of were exposed to theater a little bit just by seeing her recitals and hanging around the studio and things like that. But we weren't dancing yet. But what really intrigued us was we took a trip to San Francisco, and we ended up seeing the touring production of Annie. And Kurt and I were just like totally amazed. And of course, we were two gay boys in Texas, really. I think we just loved, the escape, and we thought, we just fell in love with it. So, much to the dismay of my father, he really, he didn't know what to think, really. But yeah, we fell in love with it. We loved musicals, and, the minute we got home, we put on the soundtrack of Annie and sing Tomorrow at the top of our lungs. So, yeah, that's when it all started.
So tell me about that connection, Kyle, with your brother, Kurt. Talk about the innateness of a twin. I'm sure you guys were inseparable, but how did it, your sexuality and all that growing up, even bond you closer?
Mm-hmm. Well, we didn't really, the thing is, even though we were so close, we were very distant. I kind of painted this very happy childhood just when I first started talking about it, but in truth, it really wasn't like that. My parents ended up going through a very horrible divorce, and my mom had a very bad alcohol problem. So the two of us really needed each other because we were the only ones. All our other brothers and my sister were grown at the time and out of the house, and so we really latched onto each other and used each other just to deal with the stress of just taking turns dealing with the day-to-day stresses of living with an alcoholic and everything. So, and as we got older, I think we took each other for granted a little bit. We knew that it was special that we were twins, but I guess we didn't really appreciate each other, and especially when we started going through puberty, I think we became very guarded because we weren't sure. We just didn't even want to go there. There was too much stress, that we were dealing with already to admit to ourselves, much less to our twin, that, we're having these feelings and all of these things. So we really didn't come out to each other until we had left Texas and moved up to New York and had a few years apart, and really we could build up our own, self-identities, really. And so then pretty much when I was 20, that's when I came out to my brother, and then a year later he came out to me. So it was weird, this kind of stunted sexuality in a way, but then also just this learning to appreciate each other and say I love you to each other and really open up and really, really appreciate each other too.
Yeah, you just when you were talking about Annie, and then you were talking about your mom's addiction. Do you think you had any? When you were so young when you saw it, But
right.
did you
No,
have
but
any
there are
kind of
definitely
adverse
parallels
reaction
in that
to
show.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
you know, the alcoholism, and then the child. I mean, they're all orphans, and so they, you know, no, that didn't escape me at all. I mean, it probably did when I was young, but it's funny that's you know, that's a musical of our lives, really.
That's in more ways than one. So,
right.
so tell us about. So, what was your? How did you know you could dance? I guess both of you. How did you know? Because
I mean, we didn't really. I knew, you know, before we started actual lessons, before my parents got divorced, and you know, once a year when my sister would have her recitals for the studio, they would kind of stick Kurt and I out there with all the girls and just say, just follow them. And so we would be kind of petrified and not have any idea what we were supposed to do, but we were wearing costumes, and it was kind of this like trial by fire, I think. I never remember being scared of the stage necessarily because we had to go through those experiences. But when my parents were getting divorced, you know, we tried a million different things to keep us busy. To the credit of my mom, she wanted us to have some sort of, you know, something to do besides just worry and see what was really happening. So we tried gymnastics, which we were pretty good at, but we were scared of, and we tried soccer that we were okay with, but we just didn't get into the whole sports, not to sound cliche, but we just hated sports, and we just had no interest in it, really. So one summer when we were 7, we had been ice skating a lot down at the Tandy Center in Fort Worth, and we actually taught ourselves how to ice skate, and we were pretty coordinated, and we loved to spin, and so the rink was like pretty much set on giving us a scholarship to study there, but my mom also brought up, she was like, well, do you want to maybe take a tap class at my sister Debbie Jo's studio? And we were like, sure. And, you know, of course, we had a history of, you know, jumping around from one thing to another and not really sticking with anything. So rather than buy us tap shoes, we just took it in our penny loafers. And by the end of the summer, you know, we loved it. And we loved, like, the structure of a class, and we loved the fact that my sister was the teacher. So there was, you know, we felt comfortable in the studio. And so we started building on that. You know, by the end of the summer, we finally got pairs of tap shoes instead of the penny loafers. And, you know, the next year we started taking jazz. And then finally the year after that, we started ballet. And so it really gave us this structured life that we could really throw ourselves into after school and just, you know, sweat out all the stresses. And we were coordinated. You know, it was kind of, we had no, you know, we could only compare ourselves to the girls, really. There weren't other boys at the studio then, and so we would kind of compete with each other and just try and get better and better and better. And that kind of was the trend, you know, through our time in New York City Ballet. We would always just kind of try and one-up each other.
So, okay, well, is it true that you did like ballet at the outset, that you liked tap and jazz much better?
Yeah, I mean, we were studying at my sister's studio. It's called, that's thriving studio still in Fort Worth, Texas, called Dance Concept. But, you know, we were 7 years old, and I think we thought ballet was kind of boring, and our sister made us take it to clean up our technique and know how to use our feet, and just like, you know, ballet is really the basis of all forms of dance, and she knew that it would give us, you know, a solid technique that we could draw from. But yeah, we weren't really into it for a few years, but we saw this movie from the early 80s with Dudley Moore and Mary Tyler Moore called 6 Weeks. Yeah. Where I used to cry. Yeah. And it was,
oh my God.
Yeah. It was the early 80s, and so we had just gotten HBO, and it seemed to always be on HBO. This girl who, of course, has leukemia, and her dying wish is to be in the Nutcracker before she dies. So it was like this very kind of dramatic storyline that Kurt and I totally gravitated to. So one year when we were 11, we asked our mom if we could go see the Nutcracker, because it's all about this. And so anyway, she said, well, you guys dance instead of just going to see it. Why don't you audition for it? And so we ended up changing. We went to another just strictly ballet school, and that's where our love for ballet really started there, because we saw it was just so different. It's it's different than going to the studio where it's tap jazz ballet, where you just go to a ballet school, and it was this huge building in downtown Fort Worth with all these studios and very old, but it was just so different and stimulating. And a few years later, when we changed schools again to the Fort Worth School of Ballet, it was still that excitement, this like eye-opening experience where like it totally changed what we thought of ballet, and it was just so exciting that's we just started, after a few years, we decided to make it our lives.
So what was the process then of going from there to the New York City Ballet? What was the route?
Well, when we first went to the first ballet school, it was called Southwest Ballet Center. It was still sort of on the regional side as far as like training, but when we were 14, we switched to the Fort Worth School of Ballet, which was the studio. It was the school attached to the Fort Worth Ballet, which was a professional company in the balancing style, and that was what was so different when we were 14, seeing this company that was just steeped in this super exaggerated, Americanized, fast, syncopated style that was just thrilling to see. And we were, watching the company members, which were, these young dancers in their 20s that were dancing all day and doing these great ballets. And so it was just, that's all we wanted to do with our lives, really.
Right.
We knew the Fort Worth Ballet sort of modeled itself after the New York City Ballet, which was a company up here that George Balanchine started.
Of course.
And so Kurt and I used to sneak into, they had a tape room where they used to keep videotapes that they would stage ballets from. And so we would get the copies from the New York City Ballet that they were using and just take them home and just pop them in and just like be in total awe. And so it was always our goal to leave Fort Worth and come up to New York. It was really our dream company to join the New York City Ballet. So there's only one way to get into New York City Ballet. They rarely just audition dancers and bring them into the company. You really have to go through the school, which is called the School of American Ballet. It's really the best ballet school in America. So we started coming up for the summer courses when we were 15, and we loved it. And we got to see New York City Ballet perform live, and so they always asked us to stay for the winter term and move up here, but we were too young, really, and our parents wouldn't allow it. So finally, when we graduated high school and we were offered this new scholarship that had just been announced, it was called the Rudolph Nureyev Scholarship for male dancers. We were the first recipients, and it basically paid for everything. So there was no saying no to that. So we finally moved up when we were 18 and studied at the school full-time for 6 months, and then we were accepted into the New York City Ballet.
Now, wasn't that almost overload for both you and your brother, just moving to New York and being part of the ballet and just coming from Texas and just being in the best city in the world? I mean, how did you keep centered on the work, I guess, at such a young age?
Oh, I mean, look, that was the easy part. Like, suddenly we didn't have the stresses, of my family. We could be open about the fact that we were dancers instead of feeling embarrassed about it like we had in Texas. And we were around other guys and girls our own age. We felt like we were in just hog heaven, really, and that's all we had wanted to do anyway, was spend the whole day dancing and taking class after class, and so we just loved it. We totally immersed ourselves in it, and you have to love it, really. It's such an obsessive sort of training. You have to really love it to stick with it and succeed, really, and so I'm glad we did.
It is. Some of my good friends, and I know the head of the Joffrey Ballet now, so I've got to spend a lot of time behind the scenes with them. And just it's insane, Kyle, what you dancers go through on that level. I mean, just the psychological impact it has, not only the toll it takes on your body. I mean, these dancers are done sometimes by the time they're 28 or 30, you know.
Right.
I mean, it's just the toll it takes. So,
right. I mean, especially, you brought up the psychological aspect. That's one of the hardest things. I mean, I remember being stressed when I was at SAB, worrying if I was going to get into the company or not, or if Kurt was going to get in and I wasn't going to get in. And, you know, there's always the doubt of, like, you know, you hope, you just pray that this one dream of yours is going to happen. And there really, you know, at the time there was no alternative. We had left Fort Worth and all our chips were in this one basket. So, it was thankful that it did work out, and there's another, you know, set of psychological things that happen once you're in the company, because then you've already gotten your dream, and then it's like, well, this was my life goal for, like, you know, half my life. What do I do now? Like, what's going to make me happy now? So yeah, it keeps changing.
And I guess I should have, because I've been, you know, in the entertainment business and practicing law for so long. But I never realized the contractual side of ballet companies as well. You know, and just how that hierarchy is made. I learned about that in the last couple of years again from the Joffrey. But again, that adds a whole other dimension on top of it as well.
You mean about, you know, getting promoted and things like that, or keeping your job?
No, exactly, about being promoted within the ranks of the company itself.
Right. Yeah, it's weird. You know, I always just wanted to be in City Ballet. You know, the ballets there are just, you know, when people think of ballet, they don't really understand what Balanchine did to ballet, because, like, in any ballet at City Ballet, it's like the core is dancing as much as the principal, and it's just like this hugely dynamic musical experience, really. It's not like you're just standing in the back with a basket, you know, like traditional classical story ballets. So I didn't care if I was ever promoted. I just wanted to get into the company. But then once you get in the company, and after a few years, you know, you're doing the same thing, and you start seeing your friends promoted and things like that, then it's like, well, am I doing what I should be doing? Is this still making me happy? Am I doing what I was put on this earth to do, really? And that's when the big questions kind of start presenting themselves, really.
Of course. No, of course.
Yeah, because it's such a, you know, it's so all-consuming. You're in the theater from, you know, 10 a.m. until sometimes midnight at night, and it becomes your whole world. And you judge yourself by casting, and you just wonder, you know, is this it? Am I still creatively fulfilled? You know, all those things. Because
you were going through the New York City Ballet in the probably mid-'90s to early 2000s. So did you see, as a company member, you probably got into it just when these companies, they were trying to stay, you know, solvent. I mean, most of them, all the big companies got hit financially as well. So they were trying to mix it up more with modern dance and all of that. So I know you work with Jerome Robbins, you know, and all that, but was that, you were really in a formidable company at the onset of this mixture between ballet, bringing in modern dance and all that, weren't you?
Right. I mean, I think City Ballet always kind of tries to mix it up a little bit. Their rep is pretty varied, and they're very much into new choreography. I think they've always sort of been doing that, but I did get into the company at the end of an era, it felt like, because there were still dancers in the company that were chosen by Balanchine. You know, Lincoln Kirstein was still alive. I got to work with Jerry Robbins. Like, there were all these legends that were still alive. And even at the school, Stanley Williams was still alive, and you just felt like you were seeing something that was about to end. And so my brother and I just, you know, totally appreciated every day learning as much as we could. But and in a way, like, as far as the company, there were a lot of older dancers, especially in the core and soloists, that were leaving right when we got in. So it was kind of, the ranks were kind of, there was the turnover that was happening. And then, yeah, the longer we stayed in the company, it's like the turnover kept kind of happening, which is natural. It's like,
Right.
if you're 40 years old and in the Corps, how happy are you going to be dancing next to someone who's 18, really, and all your friends have left? And so it's a natural sort of thing that happens. And, now when I see the company, I've been gone 5 years now, everyone seems so young and so energized, and it looks great to me now. It seems very cohesive, and but yeah, it was a kind of a strangish time when I was there.
Did you ever think about, Kyle, going into more traditional musical theater from there before you got into the photography end of it?
Yeah, sort of. When I was, I guess after I had been in the company about 7 years, I started thinking, like, is this all that I'm going to do? Is this all that I'm meant to do, really? And so I started looking elsewhere just to see what my options were, because, I was in New York City. I wanted to spread my wings a little bit. So I think first I started acting. I went to the Lee Strasberg Theater Institute on my days off, on my one day off a week, and would study there, and that was thrilling because it was, something that scared the hell out of me. And just, as dancers, where there's not a lot of times where you can open your mouth and talk, really, and so to have that release, but also be on stage, it was great. And then I started singing. I started taking private singing lessons, and so I think I was trying to explore other ways of expressing myself, and also, like, I, of course, still loved musical theater, and I auditioned for a bunch of things, but nothing ever really happened. And it's funny, because, you're in New York City Ballet, and, of course, you have no perspective of the outside world or what people think. It's a totally respected profession, but it doesn't, like, necessarily translate over to different worlds, even, to Broadway or anything. They really don't care that you're, a ballet dancer. And,
right.
But it was great. It was great just for the learning experience, seeing other dancers and seeing how much I had to learn and what I was necessarily good at or not good at. And, but yeah, it just, for a while, I have to admit, it felt like I was kind of knocking my head against a wall, thinking, like, what's happening here? And just trying to still stay, energized and creative, and that's when I found photography, basically.
And how did that happen, Kyle? You just picked up a camera and look?
Yeah, basically. I was in the middle of Nutcracker season in 2005, and my husband Andrew just told the story to somebody how we had bought these deck chairs for our house in Fire Island, and there was a mix-up on Amazon, so they gave us a credit for $500. And so Andrew said, "What do you want to buy?" And I said, "Well, why don't we buy a camera?" Just as a fluke. And so I ended up having this camera just sitting at home. But during the middle of Nutcracker season, I just started seeing pictures around me and thinking, I should bring that camera to the studio, because I would see these cool angles that no one else could see, like no photographer just coming into the studio could see. You had to really be a dancer dancing at the bar with all these other dancers to see what I was seeing. And so basically that's what happened. I just stuck it in my bag and started pulling it out in rehearsals and in the physical therapy room. And before I knew it, this huge new passion had developed for me. And basically, a year later, I published a book of behind-the-scenes photos. These behind-the-scenes photos called "In the Wings." Yeah,
In the Wings. Yeah. So, who did you give the photos that you were taking to? Like, you could take a bunch of photos and they can lay around. How did you know that they were good enough to either take to somebody in the company of the ballet, and to a publisher? Like, how did you do that? Because photography books, just from a publishing standpoint, are so expensive to produce.
Totally. So I started just doing this just as a hobby. I was sick of trying to think of ways out, and this just kind of presented itself to me, and I enjoyed just the fun of taking pictures and getting better at it. And I was promising, the stage manager when I was taking pictures in the wings that it was just for my personal use. I was just, I wasn't going to publish them anywhere. It was just like for me. And I would bring them home and just show them to my husband, who used to take pictures, when he was a teenager, and he was like, "These are really good." And I think if I didn't have someone there encouraging me and telling me that it was good, I don't know if I would have really stuck with it. But he was that voice of encouragement to me. And after a few months, he was like, "I think you have a book here. Can I show it to my literary agent?" And I was like, "Please, go for it." And it just so happened that they knew this other literary agent who didn't necessarily rep photo books, but she was a ballet lover, and I think she had repped a few cookbooks. And so she was really intrigued by the idea, and I guess after a few months of searching, this article in the New York Times came out saying that Lincoln Center was doing a few collaborations with this publisher in New Jersey called John Wiley and Sons, and I just called my agent, was like, "This is like a perfect opportunity, reach out to them." They're, and sure enough, they gave me a contract, and then of course I had to deal with, all those promises that I made that I was never going to publish the pictures and everything.
Exactly. So you had to do a bunch of releases real quick.
I know, right. But everyone signed off. It was, you can never tell what something's going to be until you do it, really. And it's, it was, but yeah, I was very proud and honored to publish a book so soon.
And it was a hit book. I mean, I first remember hearing about that book back in the late 2000s, and it kind of, it was a cross genre because it almost reinvigorated a lot of the ballet companies as well, just, for people that were novices or didn't know much about it, because you're behind the scenes, really, I mean, it went throughout. It wasn't just production photos. I mean, you went throughout that ballet at different, at different times, and you were in, there were people getting hurt. It was just an all-encompassing book, so it was almost like a biography of ballet.
Well, I always thought that the view behind the scenes was so much more interesting. And I wanted to give people that perspective of the dancers didn't just get here, an hour before the show and put on their makeup and just step out on stage. It's if they knew the mental things that they went through all day, fighting off injuries, learning ballets at the last minute, and as well as the competition and just trying to stay in shape and feel good and motivated. I just thought it was such a great perspective, and I was happy to show it and really share it with everybody.
So, equipment-wise, how did you know, camera-wise, what to use when you first started out? Did you have any photography mentors that you could go to? Or was
no, not really. I mean, I think I still have that dancer mindset where you're afraid to make mistakes, kind of that, especially ballet dancer. So I kind of just tried. I just taught myself, basically. All those nights where I, stood in the wings and shot ballets right before I went on was all just this learning experience for me. So I kind of taught myself. Thank God it was a digital camera, because otherwise I never would have done it, I think. But you can see immediately if something's the wrong exposure or not. You can kind of teach yourself the whole thing and not really waste any money. So that's really why I stuck with it, because it was so easy with the digital part of it. But I had always been, a huge fan of Martha Swope and Steve Karras, and I always appreciated really good dance photography. And I also knew that a lot of dance photography out there wasn't all that interesting, really, and that I had this really cool perspective. So yeah, I just kind of stuck with it, and slowly, I started taking class at International Center of Photography and really learning studio lighting and fashion photography and things like that, and really filling in the gaps in my knowledge. And I still feel like I'm filling in gaps. Whenever I do a shoot, I always learn something that really worked or something that didn't work that I wish I had done better. And so I'm still really liking the learning experience of the whole thing.
So when you went the photography route, getting older in the dance community, how did Kurt find his path when you left?
Well, the thing is, Kurt had already left. How ironic is this? Kurt auditioned, I think it was probably the first thing he auditioned for a Broadway show called Movin' Out, the Twyla Tharp Billy Joel musical. And we were both up for it. Right. And so Kurt got it. Kurt got the, one of the leads. And so he had left New York City Ballet, I guess in 2003, and was already sort of branching out into the Broadway world. And so it was nice. I had like maybe 5 years in the company just by myself where I was doing things, that I wouldn't have gotten to do if I had left early. And so it was just a different path. I like seeing that Kurt was having these different professional experiences and hanging around with different people, and we were really just becoming our own person. Right. And even now, especially when I found photography and he's still in the dance world, like we're so nice to each other. It sounds silly, but we encourage each other, and we can see, we're still super critical at the same time, but we're encouraging of each other that I don't think we would be if we had, still remained colleagues.
Right. So how did you transition then, Kyle, from doing In the Wings into doing Broadway shows? Because talk about getting into a niche that not many people can do. Like I said at the opening of the podcast, you can literally count famous Broadway photographers on one hand, and you got in there somehow. So,
right. I guess there was maybe 2 years, maybe 2 years after In the Wings came out that I was both photographing and still dancing at New York City Ballet, and that gave me time to really build up some clientele and just see where the work was really and what really kind of learn the business side, because it's such a different thing when that's all you're doing, and suddenly I had been a dancer my whole life, and I think sorry I'm a little rambling a little bit, but when I left the company finally in 2009, there was a huge just huge learning curve that I needed to figure out really about how to look for work and still work at the same time, and just learn how to promote myself and all those things. So I just started shooting a lot for Dance Magazine and Point Magazine, and I went to Copenhagen, Denmark, and shot the Royal Danish Ballet a few times, and I had all these really cool gigs, but it's a time in between those gigs that's hard, where you have to, you need income and you need to keep your name out there. So, I'm still learning how to do that really. But I started, when Kurt, started, sorry, I'm rambling a little. Kurt,
that's okay.
Kurt,
I gotcha.
You may want to cut this part out a little. So Kurt got the job as resident choreographer for the second national tour of Billy Elliot, and he was in charge of the Billies, training them and teaching class and noting the show. And so he went on tour for a year with Billy Elliot, and it just so happened that he showed my work to the director of the company, and he loved it. And so that was the first thing that I shot, was this touring production of Billy Elliot. And so I did that a few times, and then I got more shows that I shot on tour, and then then I started getting Broadway work. So I'm still trying to build on that. It's highly competitive, that whole scene, but I'm really loving. I love musical theater, and I just love coming home at the end of the gig and looking through the pictures and with the music in my head, and just really just loving the experience. So,
let's talk about some of the shows that you shot. Let's do Phantom of the Opera, because you've gotten some amazing shots from Phantom.
Thanks.
I believe Howard was in it at the time, and there's a picture that you took. It's in the final layer with him and Christine. Now, was that during, with the makeup off and all, not the makeup off, but his mask off, and he's in all his gloriousness, I guess you could say. So was that during a rehearsal? I mean, how do you shoot Phantom of the Opera, and what are you looking for as a photographer? Because it's become one of the most iconic musicals of all time. What as a photographer can you bring new to somebody who has seen it before, who might just look at a photograph of it and say, wow, I never really understood that emotional aspect of it from an actor standpoint?
Right. Well, I think I always look at shows as an insider, really. I always try and put myself into the cast's shoes, really, and see. I mean, I know what a dancer feels when they're going through steps. Like, I know, even if I haven't danced something, I know what they're going through. And I always like trying to translate that into my pictures. When I was shooting at City Ballet, behind the scenes, like, I knew where to point my camera and show this to tell the story, really. And I also really liked, when I shoot performance photos, to show new things. I mean, it's how interesting can it be to shoot something, straight from the center of the house, just straight towards the stage. Like, I do that, and I have to do that, and a lot of times in performances you can't move around that much. So, but what I like to do and creatively like to do is to find different angles to try and really get onto the stage, or to make it feel to the viewer that they're on the stage or in this story, really totally immersed. So when I did this photo shoot for Phantom of the Opera, Joan Marcus, I shot with Joan Marcus, and she shot basically from the center, and my job was to find more interesting kind of shots, whether or not they were going to use them. But that's what I like to do anyway. So it was this perfect thing where I was running, back and forth around the house, or going up onto the balcony and trying to get, just inside the show a little bit. But yeah, it was great. It was great. That was my first Broadway show. So.
Oh, I didn't know that. So what has been the hardest Broadway show you've had to photograph? Maybe not Broadway show, but hardest musical, touring or Broadway, that you've had to shoot, and why?
Let me think. I mean, they all sort of have their own challenges, especially Broadway shows. I guess the lighting is hard to deal with a lot of times, and if you're shooting a live performance, it's called a blimp. Basically, you put your camera in this silencer, and so there's not a lot of, basically you have to set your camera and that's it. You can't open it up and adjust exposure or anything like that, so you kind of have to find like a middle ground for the whole show, and which is hard for, Broadway lighting, because it can go to super bright and super dark. So luckily I have a pretty good camera that can capture both, really. But the hardest thing, I guess, was doing certain touring productions, probably at Billy Elliot, because I had shot it before and I knew different angles that I wanted during the show, and it was a touring production, so like the back half of the orchestra wasn't really that full, so I really could move around and shoot from one side of the house to another, but it was this huge house, so I was running back and forth during the whole show, trying to, go from stage right to stage left, to the center, to up and down, and so it was just, physically, it was exhausting, but it was fun, too, because, I felt like I was, I always say sometimes I feel like I'm dancing with the dancers or the people on the stage, and I like that. I like finding the cool angles. I like moving around with them, and really the most unsatisfying is for me to be just stuck in a seat. I just feel less involved, really. But yeah, probably that Billy Elliot shoot was the hardest.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the Billy Elliot shoot, there's an amazing photograph of Lex Estramoto when he's doing electricity, and he is doing a flip, but you've caught him in midair with Rich Herbert looking at him, and you could just tell Rich is like, it's the most amazing photograph, and I love Billy Elliot. I mean, I was at the first tour with it, but it's the best photograph I think I've ever seen of a musical. I mean, it is just, I don't know. He is like just suspended in midair. I don't know, you know. But
those kids were really just incredible.
Man, oh man! Now let's talk about your website. You have an amazing website, Kyle, and you now have it where people can actually buy your stills,
right,
from the website in various sizes. So you talk about that and how all that came about, and how do you decide what you put for sale?
Well, it's really hard. For the most part, like I can't really sell production photos, especially for the Broadway stuff. Right. But if I, take behind the scenes photos, or if I conceive of a shoot or something like that, I will sell those. So first of all, my website's KyleFromanPhotography.com, and so when I just started designing the website, I wanted it to be very interactive, and there was like a huge demand for this one series of photos that I took, and so I put them on for sale online, and sure enough, it became this huge business for me. So I love it. Kyle?
What was that shoot
when I was still
clamming over it?
It was when I was still at New York City Ballet before I left. In 2008, they brought back this special gala called the Dancers Emergency Fund, and it was a special one-night kind of charity event to raise money for dancers in need. And so the company asked me to photograph the company in any way that I wanted to photograph the dancers in any way. They kind of had an idea that they wanted them separated in rank, but basically that was it. I think they said you could just recreate these pictures that we took a few years ago with people on bleachers and stuff, and I was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to just recreate something. Like, what can I do that's, fun and new? So at the time we were in rehearsal period, but I went over to the theater, and New York City Opera was there at the time, but I went around. It was during the day, and I think they were having a dress rehearsal of something, so there wasn't an audience there. But I just went around to different spots in the theater that I always thought were so beautiful and just took location shots of them. And then I just came home, saw which ones that I really liked, and then I drew in the dancers, how I wanted them posed. And I had this idea of the theater made out of dancers, sort of like they were holding up the walls and integrated into the architecture. And so it really... It was a perfect mesh for this gala, because it was like, it's all about the importance of dancers, and if one falls, then we all fall, sort of. And so it was, it kind of worked perfectly for it. And I just sketched in the dancers, and then had the dancers come. I think they came in on 2 Mondays, which is their free day. And I knew right away that it was something big for me. It was my first time posing dancers, but before then I had only done documentary stuff, like for the book In the Wings, and so I was nervous that it was going to feel silly, or there wasn't going to be a realism to it. But then I realized, like, there doesn't have to be really. It's your, you can make it as crazy as you want, really, and it's and there was meaning in it, and it was perfect. So I remember talking about one of the photos with my sister, and she kind of said, "You're never going to do anything better than this," and she meant that in the best way possible. But it really was like kind of my iconic shot of all these ballerinas laying on the theater seats, and it was funny.
And there's another one I wanted to ask you about. It's with the principal dancer from ABT, where he's. Where was that taken? Because he's laying down, just with his old tighty whities on, basically. but it's all this. He's in the water, but there's all like these broken pillars and stuff around him.
Right. So I'm very inspired by locations. Whenever like I have a gig where I get to create something, the first thing I do is find like a really evocative atmosphere to shoot in. So, I had this. I think I was looking online for modern ruins or something like that for this other gig that I was shooting, and found this place that was just south of Atlantic City with these pillars. Sorry, my cat's meowing. With these pillars sort of washed up onto the jetty, and I was like, "Where is this? It looks like, Greece or something, but it's like New Jersey." So it was. I kind of bookmarked the place and hoped that it looked, anything like that by the time I got there. And so I called Marcelo Gomez and said, I had this really cool location. Would you want to do something just for fun? And so we drove there. It took 3 or 4 hours or something, and found it, and it was incredible. I don't really know what it is. I think it's an old columns from the post office that somehow washed up onto these rocks. But I just had him climb down and hope he didn't get too wet. But it was fun. It was a lot of fun.
So what show, besides Annie, I'm sure, would you like to photograph that you haven't?
Right. I haven't photographed Annie yet.
No,
I'd love to do that. That's a good question. I want to shoot them all, so it's hard for me to narrow it down. I can't even think. I really loved shooting the current production of Les Miserables. I shot them on their tour right before it hit Broadway, and I thought that was a lot of fun. I think I always like shooting the kind of classic musicals because I like to see what I can bring new out of them, and so I don't know.
Well, we need to start doing a new book for you.
I know, right?
So people can contact you through your website. It's an amazing website, like I said before. You can purchase a lot of your prints. So you're amazing to talk to. And the success that you've had, is well earned. You're one of the nicest guys I've ever talked to, and just sometimes. I don't think photographers innately know the connection they have with their audience because sometimes it's so ethereal. But my God, when I first just saw your work, and I believe it was Stanton that I first saw, I'm like, who the hell took these? Because it's an angle of fandom, and I know with Michael Crawford and everything. I've said nobody's ever captured this show like this. So that's how I found you. So you are an amazing man, Kyle. So let's please keep in touch. And I'm going to put all your stuff up on the website and put all your contact information in. So go make us some money. Go make us some more money.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I'm very flattered. And thank you. I love talking to you too, Michael.
Okay. Thank you, my friend Kyle Froman. Bye-bye.